The edge of silence. The air in the small kitchen was thick with the scent of freshly chopped onions. Eli, a man in his mid-30s with short brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood at the counter. His plaid shirt clung loosely to his slender frame and his hands moved with unsettling precision as he chopped vegetables. The knife gleamed under the dim light, slicing through the onions and peppers without a sound. There was nothing remarkable about Eli at first glance. His calm, measured movements and the quiet hum of a clock ticking in the background could almost be comforting. If not for the eerie silence that clung to the room, the light from the single bulb above cast long shadows across the kitchen, making it feel smaller, more suffocating. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the apartment bathed in a deep blue of dusk. Eli finished chopping and paused, his eyes unfocused as he stared at the knife. Something dark flickered behind those calm, cold eyes. The living room was as quiet as the kitchen, but its air was heavier, more oppressive. Eli sat hunched over a coffee table, his fingers grazing over the surface of old Polaroid photos. Scattered in front of him, faded faces stared back at him, blank, haunted expressions. Caught in moments of silent agony, his eyes moved slowly from one image to the next, as if remembering each moment, each face, in intimate detail. The flickering lamp cast shadows that danced across the walls, deepening the lines on his pale face. Night had fallen now. The only light in the room came from that single dying bulb. The photos were a timeline of pain, neatly arranged like pieces of art. There were his works. These were his victims. Eli leaned back, his lips curled into the faintest smile as he admired his art. Elsewhere, Sophia, a woman in her late 20s, walked through the park as dusk settled. She didn't notice Eli immediately. She was lost in her own thoughts. Her steps slow and aimless as she followed the winding path lined with tall skeletal trees. The park was nearly empty, the last traces of daylight fading into twilight, and the air was thick with the kind of silence that made the hairs of the back of your neck stand up. But Eli noticed her. He trailed behind her, his footsteps carefully measured to match hers. His figure was barely more than a shadow, blending into the darkening landscape. The distance between them remained constant, far enough to not raise an alarm, but close enough to observe. Sophia felt something, an odd tingle at the base of her spine. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting around. She saw no one. The park felt suddenly vast and empty, and the tension around her grew. Eli kept his distance, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. The alleyway was dimly lit, the flickering streetlights casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. Sophia hurried down the narrow path, her breath quick and shallow, the tension in her chest rising with each step. She could feel him now. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt heavy, sluggish, as if the darkness itself was weighing her down. She glanced over her shoulder, and that's when she saw him, Eli, emerging from the shadows, his face expressionless. His eyes locked onto her like a predator stalking its prey. "Who are you? What do you want?" Her voice trembled, echoing down the narrow alley. Eli said nothing. His footsteps were soft, almost casual. As he closed the distance between them in one swift movement, he was upon her. The world spun as she tried to scream, but no sound escaped. Then, everything went dark. Sophia woke to the cold, damp air pressing against her skin. She tried to move, but her wrists and ankles were bound. Panic surged through her as she looked around. The cellar was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were bare, the floor cold and unforgiving. Chains clinked softly in the shadows. Across the room, Eli sat calmly, sharpening a long gleaming blade. The metallic sound of the knife against the wet stone filled the air, sending shivers down Sophia's spine. Her heart raced as she struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. She could see the truth now. This was no ordinary man. His calm demeanor, his steady hands, they hid something monstrous. She wasn't the first to be here, and she wouldn't be the last. Eli's voice was soft, almost tender, as he spoke. You know, most people go through life never realizing their true purpose, he said, not looking up from the blade he maliciously sharpened. But me, I see it clearly. I bring people to the edge, to the final moments, and in them moments, they find clarity. I'm giving them a gift. Sophia's breaths came in ragged gasps. She pulled against the ropes that held her, her wrists raw from struggle. But his words froze her blood. He believed this. He truly believed he was helping. Please, she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli finally looked at her, his eyes cold and unfeeling. It's almost over, he said. His voice was steady, calm. Too calm. The light flickered once more, casting long shadows on the cellar walls. As Eli stood over her, in one hand he held the blade, its edge gleaming faintly in the dim light. His face remained calm, expressionless, as he gazed down at her. Sophia's eyes were wide, filled with a mix of terror and despair. Her breath hitched, the fear so thick she could barely breathe. Time seemed too slow as the blade hovered above her. Eli's eyes were empty, devoid of anything resembling emotion. As the cold metal touched her skin, her world turned dark. The last thing she heard was the soft sound of the blade cutting through flesh, and then nothing, leaving only the lingering silence of death.